3 years ago, Al Jazeera began investigating the conviction of Abdul Basit al-Megrahi, the only man found guilty of the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie in Scotland. Now, we can reveal the results of our most disturbing investigation.
December the 21st, 1988. The night of the winter solstice. The longest night of the year. Pan Am 103 takes off from Heathrow, London. In her cargo hold is a bomb. 38 minutes after takeoff, there is an explosion. Then 200,000 pounds of kerosene ignite as the Boeing 747 Clipper Made of the Seas crashes on the small Scottish market town of Lockerbie. 259 passengers and crew are killed and 11 people on the ground. The bomb had been hidden in a Toshiba radio cassette player which had been packed into a brown Samsonite suitcase with new clothes made in Malta. Most of the dead had been Americans heading home for Christmas.
We remember them. Nicholas Bright, Colleen Renee Brunner.
Each year, on the date of the tragedy, bereaved families gather in Washington's Arlington Cemetery to remember their dead.
We remember them.
2013 was the 25th anniversary of their loss.
Alistair David Berkeley, Michael Stewart Bernstein.
Everybody who has lost a close member of their family in the Lockerbie atrocity will remain deeply affected by it for the rest of their lives. And part of the way you're affected is you want to know immediately all about who did it, why they did it, why weren't the loved ones protected.
No amount of time can put an end to your loss. No amount of time can put an end to your pain. But you know that those who committed this evil act do not have the last word. I will tell you that I remain confident to this day that al-Megrahi was one of those responsible for this terrorist attack.
To this day, the only man found guilty of the Lockerbie bombing was a Libyan official called Abdel Basit al-Megrahi. The case against al-Megrahi depended on a fragment of the bomb's timer found blasted into a shirt collar and recovered from the crash site. This evidence linked Megrahi to the bombing because it was alleged he personally bought the shirt from a small clothing shop in Malta. It also linked Libya to the crime because the fragment matched 20 timers known to have been purchased by Libya. In 2 previous documentaries, Al Jazeera has unearthed fresh evidence on the case of the Lockerbie bomber. First, George Thompson, a defense investigator, proved that al-Megrahi was never in the Maltese clothes shop.
The shop's on the left-hand side here. In fact, it's closed. It's the one that says Mary's house, just right on the left.
It was the shopkeeper who picked Megrahi out at an identity parade 10 years after the crash. But we showed that the shopkeeper described a man who was taller, darker, and older than al-Megrahi. We also revealed that the shopkeeper, Tony Gauci, was paid a $2 million reward by the US government. This and the many inconsistencies in his testimony tainted the judicial process. And there was more. Rigorous scientific tests on the fragment of bomb timer showed it was not one of the timers sold to Libya. The British government withheld the information from al-Megrahi's defense lawyers, even though this demolished the prosecution case.
This circuit board was manufactured by a different process to the original fragment that I analysed.
This program addresses the unanswered question: if Megrahi was innocent, who then was responsible for the Lockerbie bombing? Tripoli, Libya. George Thompson was one of the last people to visit Megrahi before he died. Thompson had worked as an investigator for Megrahi's defense team. On his deathbed, dying of cancer, Megrahi continued to insist on his innocence until the very end.
Hello there, my name is George Thompson. I've come from Scotland to see Bassett.
I never ever in my entire life been in his shop.
Before al-Megrahi died, Thompson promised to clear his name and see justice done.
Before I die. This is the truth.
Edinburgh, Scotland. Because Pan Am 103 crashed on Scottish soil, the case was handled by Scotland's legal system. A former Scottish police detective, George Thompson worked for al-Megrahi's defense team. The mass of evidence he has saved onto his computer gives him an unmatched knowledge of the case. But until recently, even he knew little of a secret report, codenamed Bird.
I was given access to the Bird report by Megrahi and documents he released to me, and I read it and then met with Jessica.
Jessica de Grazia wrote the Bird report. She's a former Manhattan district attorney and legal investigator whose clients included governments and major corporations. She agreed to appear in this program on the condition that nothing would compromise her secret sources or their confidential intelligence. Her report was part of a Scottish legal tactic known as incrimination. It tells a story that's very different to the official account of the Lockerbie bombing.
My understanding of the Scottish principle of incrimination is that a defendant at trial can say, it wasn't me, it was somebody else. And then they can bring in evidence to prove it was somebody else. Essentially, we were asked at this very late stage of the game to find evidence that it was somebody else.
Sitting speaking with Jessica, I remember the hair in the back of my neck going up, because I then began to fully realise what had happened in Malta.
According to de Grazia, what happened on the Mediterranean island of Malta was a meeting of intelligence officers from Iran, Syria, and Libya. There were also representatives from several radical groups, including Hezbollah and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. We brought George Thompson and Jessica de Grazia together to pool their notes, evidence, and leads.
Eventually, we came across a document that relates to a meeting that took place in Malta in March of 1988. Well,
the document was written by someone who attended the meeting. We have agreed to keep the exact origins of this crucial evidence confidential.
The notes you have there are actually taken from the document containing the
Yes,
actual...
I'm reading verbatim from the intelligence report.
Good.
It was a document that was written in Arabic, and it was written by a member of one of the groups that was present at this meeting. The person writing the report says, all of these people were technicians trained in explosives, guns, and military matters. Okay? So these were hardcore terrorist combatants.
According to the document, the meeting took place in the home of Abdul al-Salam.
Abdul Salam's cover, everybody has a cover, okay? And his cover was a bakery. It was called the Mishka Bakery. He was important because he was the head of the PFLP-GC's Malta cell.
To see if this story checks out on the ground, George Thompson went looking for the bakery. The Mishka Bakery is out of business, but another bakery run by Salam is still going strong under new ownership. Though the street name had changed, Thompson also managed to locate the flat that Salam had rented.
I think we found the street we're looking for. It's been difficult because there's been a change of name in the street. The intelligence we have is that that house was used in 1988 to hold a couple of meetings that were attended by terrorist groups, and they were planning attacks against the West there.
In 1988, the flat was government property. Back then, Malta's policy was to befriend Palestinian groups so long as they carried out no military operations on Maltese soil. But for the moment, the men in Flat 18 had no specific targets in mind.
Let me tell you what was said at this meeting. In essence, they were recruiting support. We're all going to help each other. Some of us may be able to do something, some may be able to do others, but we're all going to join together. And we're going to have a campaign against Israeli and American targets. We want to inflict maximum damage. We're not sure how yet we're going to inflict it. Our targets could be gatherings in public places, it could be buildings, it could be trains, it could be airplanes. Do you want to support us in this venture? Pledge to help us.
The presence of a man called Abu Talib was significant. He headed the Swedish cell of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, otherwise known as the PFLP-GC.
Abu Talib was introduced as Abu Intiqam. And one of the participants at the meeting said, well, why are you called Abu Intiqam? Are you the son of Intiqam? And he laughed because Intiqam means revenge. Talib said, I'm called Intiqam because wherever I go, I preach that we must revenge ourselves against the Americans and the Israelis. Mr. Abu Talib started talking, and he asked each one of us to do his best and to see how he can help in Malta. Iran is going to finance us, and in addition, it will provide us with some equipment that we can use for our operations if needed. The Libyan intelligence service is going to help also. So the bottom line is the intelligence report that we got implicates Abu Talib. It places him in Malta, and it implicates Hezbollah, Iran, Libya.
This is an information report classified secret.
Al Jazeera has obtained classified cables from America's Defense Intelligence Agency that would have been used in Megrahi's defense had his appeal gone ahead. They support de Grazia's conclusions. It is a long way from Malta to the mountains of Colorado and the former mining town of Silverton. This is where a former CIA agent, Robert Baer, now has a home. He has an emotional tie to Lockerbie.
Look, I take Lockerbie as personal. My replacement in a Middle East post was on that airplane, Matt Gatton. I can't name the post. Chuck McKee, I worked with for 2 years, counterterrorism in Beirut. I've never let it go, and I will never let it go until I get the answers.
Baer took part in the CIA investigation of Lockerbie. He still has the 3x7 index cards on which he wrote his case notes 25 years ago.
I always have made notes because, frankly, memory is a liar.
Baer's notes are full of references to the PFLP-GC.
The PFLP-GC is the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine General Command. It's a group run by Jibril, a former Syrian officer, very close to Damascus.
Jibril was the head of the PFLP-GC. He operated from Syria. He was under the protection of the Syrians. He still operates from Syria.
Forced from their homeland, Ahmed Jibril's recruits reject a peace they see as imposed by Israel and the US. Jibril had a network of cells in Europe waiting to be activated.
Ahmed Jibril, he was a plane bomber. 1970, I think, was his first bombing, bombed a Swiss air flight. He's got blood on his hands.
It was a tragic event in the Persian Gulf that sealed the fate of Pan Am 103. The American guided missile destroyer USS Vincennes was protecting merchant ships during the Iran-Iraq War.
Iranian Revolutionary Guard leave Omani territorial waters immediately.
At 10 a.m. that morning, the Vincennes Captain Rogers skirmished with Iranian gunboats.
Still inbound.
Filming on the bridge, a U.S. Navy film crew caught the action as it unfolded.
074. Coming inbound fast. The one at 350 is inbound. I don't know where it's hitting. Oh, dead. We had it, got it. That was a dead on.
Vincennes was in Iranian territorial waters when at 10:17 its radar operators detected a flying object heading straight for them.
Grid 3 tanker 032 in the haze.
The Vincennes launched 2 radar-guided missiles. But the Vincennes had not shot down a rocket or a warplane, but an Iranian commercial airliner. The USS Vincennes had killed 290 civilians, among them 66 children. Iran's leaders were convinced that the airliner had been deliberately brought down. They promised vengeance. We must all be prepared for a real war and fight against America and its lackeys.
This is crucial. They thought that if they didn't retaliate against the United States, we would continue to shoot down their civilian airliners. If you don't understand that, you don't understand Lockerbie.
Once a senior Iranian intelligence official, Abul Qasim Mesbahi used to report directly to the Iranian president. In the late 1990s, he defected from Iran and fled to Germany. He now lives in a witness protection program.
The Iranian decided to retaliate as soon as possible. The decision was made by the whole system in Iran, and then confirmed by Ayatollah Khomeini. The target was to copy exactly that was happened to the Iranian Airbus. Everything exactly same. Minimum 219 people dead. This was the target of the Iranian decision makers.
According to CIA intelligence, Iran's leaders turned to the PFLP-GC.
6 days after taking down the Airbus, there was a meeting in Beirut. We know where it occurred. The Iranians went to the PFLP-GC, the break-off faction, and said, all right, you guys know how to bring down airplanes, bring down five civilian airliners.
The execution of the operation was contracted to Ahmad Jabril, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, PFLP-GC leader. Money was given to Jabril up front in Damascus for initial expenses. The mission was to blow up a Pan Am flight.
When you read the DIA cables, you are seeing a reflection of the intelligence community, the National Security Agency and the CIA, their best information. This isn't like the DIA's theory of what happened in Lockerbie. They're reflecting the theory of the National Security Agency and the CIA.
The intelligence that we developed is that the Lockerbie bombing was masterminded by Ahmed Jabril, who was the head of the PFLP-GC, and he was supported by Iran.
The man in charge of the operation was a Palestinian called Hafez Qasim Dalkamouni.
Hafez al-Dalkamouni, I've got a bunch of stuff on him here. He was middle-aged. We had people close to him. He said he regretted not being part of the Intifada, that he hadn't really fought the Israelis. He'd always wanted to be a soldier in the liberation of Palestine. He was looking for a cause when the Iranians approached him.
Dalkamouni was a seasoned member of the PFLP-GC, a long-term soldier, fighter, a brain, very trusted, very close to Jabril.
Dalka Mooney had access to the PFLP-GC plane bombers. The Iranians didn't have direct access. So they went to him and enlisted him to bring the airplane down.
The PFLP-GC ordered its cell in Germany to prepare for a major operation. What the organization did not know was that German police had them under surveillance, and in the autumn of 1988, they observed Dalka Mooney arriving from Syria. On the 13th of October, an expert bomb maker called Marwin Krisat was seen to join him. The two men went shopping here for batteries, switches, glue, and for mechanical and digital clocks. The Dalka Mooney then evaded police surveillance and traveled to Cyprus on a false East German passport in the name of Mark. Abu Talb, Dalka Mooney's PFLP-GC colleague, was already in Cyprus, staying in a rundown hotel, now a gambling joint.
Dalka Mooney and Talb met up in Cyprus, and Talb had spent a significant amount of time in Cyprus. Why is that significant? Because Cyprus is a place that you get false documents, it's a place that you can also get money.
Dalka Mooney did draw operational funds from this building, which now houses an unrelated insurance company that used to be the Arab Bank. Flush with funds, the two key operatives in the Pan Am plot didn't stay in Cyprus for long. They had pressing business in Malta, where the PFLP-GC had a cell, a safe house, and had scheduled an important meeting. George Thompson has been looking for evidence that Talb and Dalka Mooney both visited Malta that October.
This morning we're on our way to the National Library at Valletta. We're going to meet up with a local journalist who has agreed to assist us. We're looking for a back issue of a newspaper who reported heavily at the time on the case.
George Thompson meets Mark Mikolev, who has been combing through back editions of a now defunct local newspaper.
The newspaper you were interested in for the period.
And that's all in the Maltese language, it's no English at all.
It's a Maltese language newspaper. It was owned by the Labour Party. It's not published anymore.
It seems that back in 1989, a police or intelligence source leaked a crucial piece of information to one of the paper's reporters.
Oh, see that? That's Dalka Mooney, and that's Abu Talb. What does it say about them?
It says here, it discusses the fact that a group from the Palestinian Liberation Front are in Malta, and that Hafiz Dalka Mooney and Mohammed Abu Talb were in Malta in mid-October 1988 to speak about Pan Am flight.
Well, see, that's very important to our project. These two were central to the case, and that ties in with separate intelligence, which suggests that did happen. And, you know, that's worth the trip on its own to confirm that.
Malta, late October 1988. For the second time, the co-conspirators gather at the flat of Abdul Salam. This time, they had a definite target to discuss.
The second meeting was all about ironing out the details of how they were going to get a bomb on an American plane.
De Grazia's source has provided intriguing information about Talb's health during that meeting.
One of the things that you're looking for when you're trying to evaluate the quality of intelligence or the credibility of a witness at trial, etc., is you're looking for little details that have the ring of truth to them. There was an observation made about Talb that he looked very weak and he was very thin. And what Abdul Salam said is that actually he had been in a knife attack in Sweden. He had been stabbed in Sweden by, I think, a Palestinian in his video shop, I think.
Yeah. It was mentioned in the notes at the time.
Yeah.
Not so much he was stabbed.
What we were told is that he was such a dedicated freedom fighter that even though he was ill, this was such an important mission that he was traveling for this mission.
Right.
And I think that's a much better explanation.
Well, yeah, that's the truth.
Late October, Dalkamoni has returned to Germany and Taub is back in Sweden. But Germany's federal police, the BKA, still have them under close surveillance. Fearing an imminent terrorist attack, the Germans raid 14 apartments in Frankfurt and Neuss, arresting 17 men. Operation Autumn Leaves leads to the seizure of grenades, guns, and explosives. In the back of a green Ford Taunus, driven by Dalkamoni, police discover a bomb hidden in a Toshiba radio cassette player. It has been designed to bring down a plane. The bomb is activated by a barometric switch which would detonate when the plane reaches a certain height. The bomb has what police call a signature. Its maker has wrapped the plastic explosives in Toblerone chocolate wrapping paper.
In this particular sweep that was done, there were 5 bombs, but they only found 4 of the bombs.
Everybody was panicking on the 5th device. After the raid, everybody said, well, where's the 5th device? We got to find that. I mean, they knew there was a 5th device, but it was lost. They had no idea what happened to it.
These raids would have had a modest effect. And the reason that they would have had a modest effect is most of the people were let go. It was only Dalkamoni who received a significant prison term. And even while Dalkamoni was in prison, he was still communicating with the rest of his group.
Much of the PFLP-GC terrorist infrastructure in Western Europe appears to remain intact and is quite likely capable of assisting in future terrorist attacks.
After autumn leaves, it was very much a catch-up game for the Germans, following these people around. They fully acknowledged they didn't have a complete grip on this, nor that that was the end of the cell.
A crucial error. The countdown to disaster had begun. On December the 5th, 1988, a man with an Arab accent calls the US Embassy in Helsinki, Finland. He warns that a bomb will be planted on a Pan Am flight in 2 weeks' time.
Somebody made that warning who knew what was going to happen. They had to be close to the group that was planning it, knowing that this is a conspiracy.
Yet the warning seems to have been ignored. Time ran out 38 minutes into Pan Am 103's final flight. The explosion in the forward luggage hold pierced the plane's skin. 30,000 feet above the ground, the Boeing 747 began to disintegrate. She spiraled to the ground, scattering passengers and wreckage across the Scottish countryside and onto the town of Lockerbie. On the morning after the crash, human remains and plane wreckage lay scattered over 400 square miles of Scottish landscape, and every shard of metal, every scrap of flesh or bone was now a clue in the biggest case of mass murder ever seen in Scotland. Air accident investigators found evidence that the bomb had been hidden in a brown hard-shell Samsonite suitcase. Tiny fragments of black plastic matched that of a Toshiba radio cassette player, like the one captured by the German police. Minute pieces of mesh matched the Toshiba's loudspeakers. They even found bits of chocolate wrapping paper. Everything seemed to bear the unmistakable signature of the PFLP-GC's bomb maker in Germany. Dr. Jim Swire lost his daughter Flora on Pan Am 103. He attended every day of Megrahi's trial, and the timing of the crash convinced him that the explosion must have involved a barometric device, just like those made by the PFLP-GC.
What swung me round most strongly was the evidence given by a West German forensic officer, Herr Goebel. Goebel told the court that it took about 7 minutes for that switch to switch itself on if it was put inside an aircraft after the time the wheels left the tarmac. And within 30 minutes of that, a timer which was switched on by the air pressure switch would cause the bomb to explode. So you had a total runtime from when the plane left the tarmac of approximately 7 plus approximately 30 minutes. And the Lockerbie plane exploded after 38 minutes of flight.
Within 3 months of the crash, the British government seemed to believe the case was open and shut. On the 16th of March 1989, at the exclusive Garrick Club in London, the Minister for Air, Paul Channon, met 5 journalists for lunch. Their conversation was off the record.
Basically, he told us that the authorities were about to make an arrest in the case of the Lockerbie bombing. He praised the efforts of the Galloway police, which is a very small police force, and basically gave us the impression that the whole thing was tied up, which came as a considerable surprise. But he was certainly very definite about the fact that they'd got the right people. And at that stage, I think most of us surmised that it was the PFLP who were kind of potentially in the frame.
The investigation was focused on the PFLP-GC and on Abu Talib in particular. The bomb had been wrapped in clothes made in Malta and allegedly purchased from this shop. The man who bought the clothes was supposed to be al-Megrahi, the alleged Lockerbie bomber. But Talib had also bought clothes in Malta and may even have shopped in Mary's house. In fact, this program has learned that when the owner of Mary's house was first shown pictures of likely suspects, the first photo he picked out was one of Abu Talib.
One of the things that I was so struck by is just how much there is that links Talib to this. I mean, just extraordinary amounts of circumstantial evidence. When Talib was arrested in May of 1989, so that would have been, what, roughly 6 months after Lockerbie, what do they find in his house? Okay. They find clothing that had been bought in Malta. They find circuitry, barometer, which is used to make the bombs.
Barometric pressure.
They found a manual on electrical circuitry. They found lots of empty watch casings, all sorts of equipments that are related to bomb making. And this was actually found in his house.
By the summer of 1989, the Scottish police were ready to make arrests. This report by Superintendent Pat Connor identified 15 members of the PFLP-GC whom he wanted arrested and questioned.
And they were pretty sure that they had the right people. In fact, I have spoken to a police officer who attended what he would refer to as a piss-up, and what in actual fact is a celebration, a wee party celebrating the fact that they'd got their men.
What happened next remains one of the biggest mysteries in the Lockerbie affair. It started when the American President, George Bush Sr., called the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher.
It seems to have been well corroborated afterwards that there was some kind of warning from George Bush to Margaret Thatcher to play down Lockerbie. I suspect there were wider political reasons in terms of keeping in or out with particular Middle East governments at the time, and a desire perhaps to keep on the right side of the Syrians who were protecting the PFLP.
Towards the end of 1989 and into January 1990, the whole emphasis of the investigation appeared to turn, and all the evidence that they had before against the Palestinians just seemed to dissolve.
At some point, the CIA and the FBI investigations diverged completely like this, because the case was being run by the Department of Justice in complete disregard to the intelligence. As far as I can tell is someone said, look, Libya's vulnerable to prosecution. Small country, Gaddafi's hated, let's go for it. It was an executive decision, and then once that happened, everybody lined up. So the people in the intelligence community could just go off, yeah, fine, take your theories and run off. And that works until the evidence is proved to be faulty.
During the trial of Abdul Basit al-Megrahi, which took place in a specially built courthouse in Holland, the prosecution laid out a whole new theory of the case. Prosecution argued that two Libyans, Megrahi and his co-conspirator, Fahima, smuggled the bomb onto an Air Malta flight. A barometric bomb would have exploded on takeoff from Malta. But a timer set to explode several hours later could survive 2 takeoffs and 2 landings without detonating. So according to the prosecution, the suitcase with the bomb in it could be offloaded in Frankfurt and put on a Pan Am feeder flight to London's Heathrow Airport. In the end, the timer, allegedly provided by the Libyan government, detonated the bomb inside Pan Am 103 38 minutes after its takeoff from London. But right from the start, this whole scenario was problematical.
There was never any evidence of the bomb going on the plane at Malta, and this was actually agreed in court. Both the judges and the appeal judges said that this was a major difficulty for the prosecution, that there was no evidence.
Morag Kerr is a respected research scientist and a keen Gaelic musician. Her definitive study has traced every suitcase on Pan Am 103 in order to pinpoint where the bomb was planted. She dismisses the idea that the suitcase with the bomb could have been introduced in Frankfurt.
The bomb was certainly put on the plane at Heathrow. I know there have been various theories about Frankfurt which were fairly reasonable, but the evidence about the Heathrow introduction of the bomb really is so strong that I would say it's beyond any reasonable doubt.
Kerr focused her attention on London and a baggage handler called John Bedford, who loaded the luggage container that turned out to hold the bomb.
The evidence from the baggage handlers at Heathrow was in fact quite detailed, and the baggage handler dealing with that container started off with one that had come in the morning and put that handle up towards the back of the container, and then he filled it up moving left to right just as the suitcases arrived. And after that, he went off for a tea break. And when he came back, he noticed a brown hard shell, the type Samsonite make. What type of suitcase was the bomb in? A brown Samsonite hard shell. This was Mr. Carlson's suitcase.
Police photos of suitcases caught in the blast are vital evidence.
The photographs are crucial because there you can see that very few of the suitcases ended up as suitcase confetti. Most of them were only partially damaged. And when that suitcase is partially damaged, you can see where it was sitting in relation to the explosion. The bomb suitcase had to be one of these 2 positions. And in fact, it can be shown that the bomb suitcase was actually in the position of that suitcase that John Bedford saw an hour before the feeder flight landed.
Following the autumn leaves raids in Germany, Hakim Dalkamoni was held in prison for several months. While the case against Libya and Megrahi grew weaker, the case against Iran and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command continued to harden. On February the 13th, 1989, police searched Dalkamoni's cell and found the draft of a highly suggestive letter.
When Dalkamoni's cell was searched, they found various bits of writing in Arabic. And one of the things that he wrote had a sentence which was equivocal, but very interesting. In it he said, why doesn't the PFLP-GC talk more about what is behind Lockerbie? One possibility is that he was saying, why doesn't the PFLP-GC take more credit for Lockerbie? Say what Lockerbie is all about.
Harder evidence comes from Defense Intelligence Agency cable traffic, which has Iran paying off the PFLP-GC.
In late January or early February 1989, the former Minister of the Interior, Ali Akbar Motashmi-Pour, wrote a check drawn on the Iranian Central Bank made payable to a mullah called Efnu Shafia, who in turn transferred the money to Jabril. The transfer took place at a meeting in Damascus.
CIA intelligence suggests there is a pattern to these payments.
Here's a guy after the bombing. They found his name in Autumn Leaves records, and he called Abu Jassim in Damascus to send $11 million. And the point is, you've got GC handling in Paris $11 million after Lockerbie. Look, now here's Muhammad Abu Talib. Here's his, they refused to look into this. It just pissed me off. He had the Degussa Bank in Frankfurt. His account number was 560-200. On the 25th of April, 1989, he received $500,000.
Soon after the crash, there was a third meeting at the flat in Malta, according to Jessica de Grazia's sources.
We were told that following the bombing of Lockerbie, 2 or 3 days after it, Abdus Salam had a great party to celebrate this victory in the war against the Israelis and the Americans.
I saw some intelligence, which the CIA has allowed me to publish in a book, but the intelligence was grade A, rock solid, that Abu Talib and Dalkamuni were named in an honor roll internally in Iran for a great service they did to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Our assumption inside the intelligence community is because they participated in Lockerbie.
So where now are those whose names are linked to Lockerbie? Men like Dalkamuni, Talb or Krisat, now old men who have vanished into obscurity. Marwan Krisat, the PFLP-GC's former master bomb maker, lives in Amman, in Jordan. Proud of his days in the PFLP-GC, these photos come from his Facebook page. A few days before this program was completed, Al Jazeera made contact with him. When we called him, he agreed to meet us.
أنا في عندي حقائق كثيرة وبعطيك إياها يعني بإثباتات خلينا نقول يعني إحنا أول ناس في العالم فجرنا طائرة بالجو، أول ناس في العالم. موضوع اللوكربي أنت عندك فكرة عنه؟ وأنا كلش مش كذب شان لوكربي.
Down now, down. Police car.
But when we arrived at his apartment block, he was a very frightened man. He lives under constant surveillance by Jordanian intelligence. He had been ordered not to talk. But later, a source close to Krisat told Al Jazeera that the attack had been commissioned by Iran and that the bomb was put on board in London. Abu Talib never stood trial for the Lockerbie bombing.
We're heading down to the address we got from the tax office last night for Abu Talib, and we're now heading to check that address out, see if we can contact him and see if he'll maybe speak to us.
Exactly 1 year after Lockerbie, a Swedish court found Talib guilty of unrelated acts of terrorism, including bombings and murder. After serving 20 years, he was released from prison 4 years ago. He's now fighting against deportation from Sweden.
Got a mailbox there.
This house appears to belong to Abu Talib's family.
Hi there.
But when George Thompson knocks on the door, it's not Talib who answers, it's his son, who tells us his father won't be interviewed.
Why should he talk to you? Through all these years, My father never talked to anyone.
Yeah.
I've talked to my father a lot of times. Lockerbie, he said he never had anything to do with it. The problem is that he had connections in other things, like the stuff he got arrested for.
Yeah.
And people were afraid that he might turn a finger and point out other people. After 20 years in jail, you get paranoid. But he has probably reasons to be. And I can't see that he will talk to you.
Abu Talib has maintained a 25-year silence, and he isn't willing to break it now.
It's a long shot. It's a very, very long shot.
Later, Talib's son threatened to call the police if Thompson persisted. The truth of what happened in Lockerbie is finally taking shape. But the unanswered questions remain.
So long as the relatives of those who died at Lockerbie, either in the plane or on the ground, are alive, then I think questions will continue to be asked.
We have a right to the truth as to who murdered our loved ones, and a right to the truth about why the aircraft that carried them wasn't protected, and we're not going to go away.
Criminal cases have been solved after many years because of evidence that was re-examined, and I think that something could be found.
I'm not giving you a controversial opinion here. I kept up with all of the CIA intelligence side, and to a man, they said it was Iran.
It is quite clear that both the British and the US governments know far more than they have been prepared to release into the public domain until now.
I've often wondered whether or not the truth about Lockerbie will ever come out. So many people at such a high level have a stake in al-Megrahi's guilt. Talking about presidents of the United States, secretaries of state, heads of the FBI, British prime ministers. That's what makes this case so difficult.
Al Jazeera invited the Iranian government to respond to the issues raised by this film. It declined to comment, but in the past its officials have strongly denied any involvement in the Lockerbie bombing. We also approached the British and American governments. The US State Department referred us to previous statements about Lockerbie. In December 2013, it said, "We want all those responsible for this most brutal act of terrorism brought to justice, and to understand why it was committed." The UK Foreign Office told us that the British government had confidence in the Lockerbie investigation carried out by Scottish police, and that Abdul Basit al-Megrahi had been found unanimously guilty by 3 judges in 2001, a decision that was upheld on appeal. But it added that Scottish police and prosecutors have always made clear that they believe Mr Megrahi did not act alone. The police investigation therefore remains open.